So this is for the American Grows number 4, this is for the Stevan number 1. But if you look, both of them are going to go Oriskany through Medina, this one's going the Clinton through Medina. They're all going to basically end up at the same depth. How much can it take? Do we know? Do they know? Okay, that's the concern. And this is just the geologic map. I don't want to get into it in detail, but I do have to say that your Buckeye Environmental, you should look at that lawsuit, because the geologic report that accompanies it is very, very thorough, and basically is saying, you guys don't have the geology to support this. Okay? And then what could possibly go wrong? Again, one of the major things that can happen is that you can have a failing in the cement around the well itself. Because one of the things that I've noticed, that when these wells have problems, it's because the companies are trying to shove down so much stuff in a short period of time at great pressures, it challenges the integrity of the wells themselves. So it's the amount of fluids, it's the pressures that they're using, and they're really stressing these things out. Okay, and of course, if you have, there are a number of other things that can happen, and especially if, as you've already witnessed here, and it's happening in more and more, and I know that some of the other speakers are going to address this, but there have been multiple communication events. Okay, it happens going down, it happens going up. I've been working with a community in New Freeport, Pennsylvania. They had a quote-unquote frack out back in June of 2022. Okay, a lateral well at a depth of 7,800 feet communicated with a conventional well, an abandoned well, a little more than 3,000 feet away, all the way up to the surface. Okay, it doesn't happen. Yes, it does. And if we looked, and we just published this in a peer-reviewed journal, over a 6-year period, there were 54 such communication events reported by the Department of Environmental Protection in Pennsylvania. So that calculates out to about 1%. Now, 1% doesn't sound a lot, but that's one communication event for every 100 wells that are drilled. So you know that sort of thing, and then you have to talk about the rate of casing failings, because it's cement, okay? So there are things that can happen, and ideally you don't. But again, if you're putting all this stuff down, you don't know where it's going, you don't know what possible routes of connection exist, then it's essentially, it is a crapshoot. All right, so why is this such a concern? It's only brine, right? Well, here's one of the things. This was a farm that I visited back in 2010. You can see that this produced water from the well. This is a Marcellus shale well. It's produced water in crude oil, and it's hazard placarded to be flammable and toxic, okay? That's great, but once it gets into the truck, it's residual waste. That's another thing that people don't understand about this industry, okay, is that they've legislated the safety of these materials, okay? RCRA, which was passed back in the 70s, oil and gas waste is legislated as non-hazardous, okay? And then, of course, you have the Halliburton loophole, which basically says that fracking does not pose a threat to our drinking water sources. So it's out of the purview of the EPA. So you have major loopholes that are allowing this industry to handle this waste as non-hazardous. And yet, we do, okay? So this is the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which basically says it's special waste. Why is it so important? And I believe that Justin is going to talk about this, the radio, oh no?
Not so much.
Okay, well anyway, but the whole point is that this is the amazing thing about these brines, okay? They have uranium and they have thorium to begin with in the rocks, but that decays to radium. And radium can decay to radon, which we all know. I just had my system upgraded in Pittsburgh. We definitely have a radon problem. But anyway, that also decays further to things like polonium and lead-210, which are also radioactive. So if you take a gallon of this stuff, seal it up in a bottle, in 2 weeks' time, it's 5 times as hot, because the daughter products that these different elements decay to are also radioactive. So the stuff just gets hotter as it incubates, okay? And then, of course, they do generate different types of radiation, alpha, beta, and gamma. Don't want to go too much into that, just to suffice it to say that it poses a threat because of the radiation. And again, to think about this, so number one, a number was thrown out shortly earlier, 5 picocuries. Picocuries, wow, that's pico, okay? It's not nano, it's not milli, it's pico, so it's really, really small. But that's picocuries per liter. We still haven't gone metric. So there's 3.8 gallons in a liter. Okay, so you got to multiply that by 3.8. And then when someone says, oh, and it's a barrel, well, there's 42 gallons in a barrel. So now you're starting to do the math, and you see how much waste this industry is actually generating. Okay, it's over, what, a trillion gallons of liquid waste a year now across the country? So again, and what is this? Oops, sorry, shoot. These are samples that were collected by an Ohio trucker, okay? And this is the data. So these are from different pads and whatnot. But here, the Thompson Run pad, that sample had 7,370 picocuries per liter, okay? And then your typical waste truck now holds about 4,500 gallons, but there are even bigger ones that haul even more. And these guys aren't told that that's what they're hauling. I just was at a meeting of Halt to Harm with a bunch of truckers who are organizing now because they want protection, because they're not told that this stuff is radioactive or toxic. But again, these are all things from Ohio. And this is what your Ohio ODNR thinks you should do. But I'll point something out here. This is right off the website from like 2 weeks ago, okay? But the last time it was revised was 2004. That's prior to you guys developing Utica. Okay, and I love that. That's how they're telling you that this is how you're supposed to dispose of your brine, by putting it on your roads. Okay? And then this is a product that we've actually studied in my lab that's made in Ohio, or was made in Ohio. It's called Aqua Salina. It's a de-icer. And be aware, because legislation is, every so often someone introduces a bill saying this stuff is safe for roads. Okay? But it's, again, it's safe for pets, but you really want to keep it away from children. It kills ice. Well, and it's not ancient seawater, okay? I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And so here's the data, okay? It's got 600, our sample from Lowe's had 625 picocuries per liter of radium-226. And every so often I've vented it with my radon detector. It's a radon generator, okay? But there's also chromium, there's heavy metals, there's arsenic, there's all this other stuff, but he's telling you it's safer than a banana. Okay? I mean, this is the kind of stuff, and this is that they've actually spread on your roads in Ohio. But again, that's not where you want to put it. Okay? This stuff is toxic, it's radioactive, it's a problem. And back to the injection wells. Okay? This is a paper, selfless promotion, 2 years, in 2022, I co-author edited a book called The Environmental Impacts from the Development of Unconventional Oil and Gas Reserves. I brought a copy with me, but I had scientists from around the world contribute to this about different things, and this is from the chapter on seismic activity associated with fracking and specifically injection wells. Okay, not just here, but across the country. But you can see that the U.S. is lit up. And the reason for that is places like Oklahoma. This is Oklahoma 2008 to 2011. Not much seismic activity, which is odd to begin with. But look at that, 2016 to 2019, the increase in seismic activity. They're telling people in Norman, Oklahoma, they should get earthquake insurance now. And Oklahoma gets more earthquakes than California, and it's all linked to the injection wells. So call me a little, am I concerned? I'd be. And then, of course, even your hometown, Youngstown. This is in a peer-reviewed journal. It was published back in 2013. Induced seismicity associated with fluid injection into a deep well in Youngstown, Ohio. Okay, so you know that you don't have the, but again, the company wants $20 million from the Ohio taxpayers after its injection well caused 2 earthquakes. All right, you're going to wind up paying for it one way or the other. Okay, this is the crazy thing. So anyway, I hope that was informative. There's a lot going on, but you should not be doing this.
All right, there's more coming, guys. All right, our next keynote speaker of the night is Justin Noble. Justin is a journalist, and he will present findings from his upcoming DeSmog investigation, revealing that both industry and federal scientists have privately known for more than 50 years that injection wells are risky, unreliable, and prone to failure. Justin holds a master's degree in both earth and environmental science and journalism. He is an award-winning environmental journalist and author. His 2020 Rolling Stone magazine story, America's Radioactive Secret, won an award for Best Narrative Feature with the National Association of Science Writers and inspired his 2024 book, Petroleum 238. So if you're doing Christmas presents still, make sure all your friends and family get a copy. And with that, I'd like to introduce Justin Noble. I have this for you.
Oh, beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm double mic'd now. And this is the clicky thing?
Yes, yeah, it's opposite. The bottom one advances. Oh, sorry. One more. There we go. Sorry.
Beautiful. Okay. Just want to thank, it's good? Thank the organizers of this event. I want to thank the college. It's a really special place to be coming to a local school and speaking. And I really especially want to thank you all. This is just like an absolutely incredible turnout. I feel like I'm at a Taylor Swift concert or something. I mean, it's amazing. You all have come out, and you've come out to learn and hear about science, which is, as a science journalist, I think that's really cool. I know a lot of journalists spend a lot of time on social media these days. I much more believe in a very old school type of journalism, which is to go back with the information you've learned and to go to the actual communities where you spend time and deliver it in exactly this way. So I'm really appreciative. It's like a human tweet. And I've been in touch with some of you for a very long time. I don't know if Bob Lane is in the room tonight. Okay. And Bob Wilson. Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to these individuals over the past couple of years more than a lot of family members. And I appreciate them. They are a lot of labels, a lot of words can get thrown around, activists, this and that. I mean, these are people, in my opinion, who have their ear to the ground, literally. They're paying attention to what's happening in this community, their community, and they're calling up people and observing and trying to convey to other folks what's going on. And I certainly was, eager to hear their call and listen. So what I'm going to lay out this evening, not so much things I've observed in Ohio. There are things that I've learned in the other branch of what I do as a journalist, which is dig. I come out into the real world and spend time with folks like the Bobs and many others in communities across the country, and then I go back and I do research. And I've come up with some really, I think, important documents that I will present to you all. So this is, again, very old school. This is, I did this with my folks. I was at my parents' the other night. It was my birthday. And I was like, let's try and take a photo. And so my dad took the photo. I gave him photo credit. But this is like really what's happening. I mean, I think this is a physical example of sweeping it under the rug. In this case, like the rug is, the surface of the earth we all live in, and the sweeping, the stuff is, as Dr. Stoltz just pointed out, quite concerning, toxic, and can be elevated in various radioactive elements, waste. And this is also something I think that's so important, really a respect to people and to communities and to workers in parts of the country that are involved in this process of oil and gas development. It's clearly something that the entire country relies on, and yet not every part of the country understands some of the work that goes into it, and work actually at the wellhead, and then on the backside, this sort of shadow part of the industry, which is what happens to the waste. And I know the concern is in communities, but I certainly, I think most of my concern actually is for some of the workers, because where you all are worried about it spreading out deep underground, and this is a very valid worry, and we'll see that there's a lot of reason to be concerned there. Many of these workers have these materials just intimately covering them. They're in tanks with it. They're in contact with various sludges. And this is an individual who did a job in Ohio that has been described to me as swamping. So it's like you go into the back of the brine truck and you have to clean out the sludge, the sediment that settles out at the bottom. And you think, I always use the example of coffee. Like if you have a good coffee, made in a French press or something, pour over, you let it sit, a lot of the stuff settles at the bottom. And in a brine tank, there's a lot of different minerals and elements, as Dr. Stoltz pointed out. That stuff will settle out at the bottom as well. So the bottom of a tank or the bottom of a brine truck can get quite contaminated, all those contaminants that he was talking about. And these workers are often literally shoveling that material out or pressure washing it without appropriate PPE. So I think that's concerning. A lot of these jobs can be very good money, but you're not necessarily being told, and that's an issue as well. Okay, so we're going to go back in time tonight. This is just such an incredible statement. So we're going back to 1932, Kansas, and there was a meeting, and someone with the industry spoke and gave this quote. I'll just read this whole thing in full because I think it's again, a lot of this is like peering into the future. Like they didn't know this room existed, of course, 95 years later, but they sort of were imagining it. They say, regardless of whether or not we consider our waste objectionable or liable to cause damage to our neighbor or the public, the statutes of several states make it obligatory on the producer to prevent this escape of waste from our property. So laws were popping up even back then. In many instances, the courts have allowed damages because of the escape of such waste. Apparently, it is only a question of time until the opposition to the escape of our waste will become strong enough to force us, as an economical measure, to dispose of them in such a manner as will not be objectionable to anyone, and without doubt, such disposal will also be effected at a profit. Here's the real zinger. It is also apparent that we cannot escape the moral responsibility for the effect of such waste as may interfere with the orderly conduct of business, private or public, for after all, we are the public which is affected. So this is coming from the industry itself, and they really seem to care about this issue. And unfortunately, this seems to really jive or conflict with a lot of the sentences I get from them in my reporting these days. But this, to me, is showing like a true concern of this issue for their neighbors and for themselves, and recognizing that they are part of the community as well, of course. Okay, so now we're going to go on this tour. A little bit of what's been done with this wastewater. I think Dr. Stoltz laid out the problem. There's an overabundance of wastewater, and it's only been enhanced recently. These are just some of the wild things that have come up in Mississippi. This was in this book, which is a great book. Among many other things they did with the waste, they actually ran it into a wood-sided swimming pool. They called it Crystal Lake and invited kids to swim in it. I mean, it's not fracking wastewater. It was before what we call modern fracking, but it's oil and gas wastewater, and of course, that I don't think was a good idea, and the salt hurt kids' eyes. But with time came different ideas. And so now we go to road spreading. And this is the first instance I could find, it's in Michigan, of road spreading, June 1936. And I'll just read the quote at the bottom. In this section, in the heart of the oil field, the brine is much cheaper than the salt. In fact, one of the biggest problems of the oil industry is just how to get rid of this brine. So again, you see that there is a conundrum. We have a lot of wastewater, and this is an interesting, it's kind of a beautiful trick, and it's a really relevant one. It's not just sort of a laughing matter, but I think if you're in a community in the northern part of the US, you have a legitimate cost with snow and ice disposal. It can be one of the highest items on your budget if you're in a public works department in a small northern community, and the oil and gas industry has come along and offered, you don't have to spend money on salt, we will give you something for free that will do it, and that of course is an attractive offer, and that, as this document shows, this news article goes back some time. By the way, on the road spreading issue, communities have been fighting it for almost as long, and there's a long history of battling over that practice of road spreading, but it certainly has received opposition for a very long time. Okay, this was, I think, a really important early alarm bell. This is again from Michigan. It's the Michigan Geological Survey Division, and they're just talking about problems that they've had. This isn't specifically related to injection wells. They're just talking about disposal of brine. In many cases, it was going into pits or ponds or creeks. And just, again, we'll read through some of the problems. All plans involving surface storage or controlled discharge of brine waters proved unsatisfactory. Groundwaters in the vicinity of brine-producing oil fields became polluted and unfit for use. Surface vegetation, including shrubs and trees, destroyed. Property damage, even downstream. There's damage to fish. And then, getting to the situation in Marietta, several cities, towns, and industries became alarmed at possible permanent damage to their water supply because of oil field brine. And I think one important thing for me in looking back in this research is realizing, I didn't have to cross any special magic bridge to get to this material. This was all there. And you'd think coming now towards the present, when you have the industry really growing in size and taking on a new shape and form, I think there should have been more concern for what was coming. A really important document, this is from Ohio, 1971, water pollution by oil field brines and related industrial waste. And I'll just read the first line here because this is fascinating. The serious and widespread effects of brine pollution are rarely recognized by most individuals, including those in state legislatures who formulate the laws. So I'll leave it up to you to determine whether that's still the case today, but I think it's an important recognition. Now, injection wells are, go back to that first image of sweeping it under the rug. So this is a kind of famous photo of the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland catching fire in the late 1960s. It turned out the river at that time regularly caught fire, but this one was captured by a Time magazine photographer. The importance of being there to get the scene. It's a really charged photo, and it helped lead to the Clean Water Act, which is regarded as one of the landmark pieces of legislation, environmental legislation in the U.S. Now, there's this. At first, I was thinking, oh wow, that's so wild. The Clean Water Act, and the Clean Water Act is very well-meaning. They're saying we don't want situations like this. We don't want industrial waste going into rivers and, for God's sakes, actually catching fire, let alone even being drinkable or swimmable. So we need to deal with that. We have the Clean Water Act, and they had a really beautiful vision to make, I think, all waters of the United States drinkable and swimmable by 1980, which is less than 10 years. I mean, that's admirable. But they did really help to halt these practices. You could not just so easily or legally discharge industrial waste into rivers. But what comes next, so this is a statement from EPA that I found in the 1974 report. Little attention, and when we say this technique, they're talking about injection wells. Little attention was given this technique until the 1960s, when the diminishing capabilities of surface waters to receive effluents without violation of standards made disposal and storage of liquid waste by deep well injection increasingly more attractive. which is kind of like a little bit of their jargon. But what they're saying is like, once they realized they couldn't dump it into rivers, they just thought, oh, well, now a more attractive option is to inject it. There it is in their own words. And so you can see 1972, the Clean Water Act. The Underground Injection Control Program came in 1980. So you might think, oh, that's great. EPA's regulating it. But if you have a question about the safety and legitimacy of this process in the first place, then suddenly you're in this concerning spot because EPA is now regulating something that may be really problematic. But they say it's a safe and inexpensive option for the disposal of unwanted and often hazardous byproducts. And then what's really amazing is if you go to the numbers, in 1950 there were 4 industrial waste injection wells in the US. In 1967 there was less than 200. And now just oil and gas wastewater alone, there's over 180,000. So that's 11 for every Starbucks. And by the way, there is a place in Ohio where there is an injection well, right in sight line of a Starbucks. It's in Cambridge, not so far from here. And I just found out that well had a leak into the parking lot. So this is, you're getting the scoop before anyone, but that's something I'm looking into now. But so, and also because you've been given numbers, so you might wonder, Ohio has, over 200. You thought that was a lot. How do we get to 180,000? Many of them are in Texas and Oklahoma, where they have a lot of problems also. Okay, another really important alarm bell. So this is a 1929 document of the US Bureau of Mines. And there you see in highlighted, they're saying the disposal of oil field brines by returning them to the subsurface appears to be feasible in certain instances. So this is kind of like the birth. We're going back in time a little bit. The birth of injection. They didn't have that much info on it, but they're saying this seems like something we can do, but great care must be used in attempting this method. Not only is there danger that the water will migrate to freshwater sands and pollute a potable water supply, but also there's an ever-present possibility that this water may endanger present or future oil production. And we just saw that on the video with gas. Okay, now this to me is so important. EPA, and before EPA, remember EPA came about in the early 70s, and it was a kind of like a patchworking together of other environmental agencies that existed at the time. So one of them was the Federal Water Quality Administration. And they give this warning: injection was a short-term fix to be used with caution and only until better methods of disposal are developed. And then later, in 1974, you have EPA repeating that statement. Essentially, they're saying, like, we're worried about this thing. We really don't want to over-rely on it. And they're saying that, remember, in the early 1970s when there were not that many injection wells. This was a really important document to find. This is a book. And the book contains talks given at a conference between the U.S. Geological Survey and the American Association of Petroleum Geologists. Hold on, I have the book. Ta-da. And it's an incredible book. All these people came around in Houston, Texas, at this conference to talk about underground waste management and environmental implications. Injection wells. That was the nature of the conference. And most of them were very, very concerned. I won't read all of these, but Stanley Greenfield, who was high up in the EPA, gives this quote, which I think is really important for what's happening today in Ohio. Deep well injection, it's a technology of avoiding problems, not solving them in any real sense. We really do not know what happens to the waste down there. We just hope. That seems to lay it out. Not a final answer. That's coming. And what's amazing is you see the industry right there is giving some of these comments. They're still concerned. Earthquakes are predicted. It's almost like an eerie prediction of exactly what's happening. In regards to that amazing comment by the landowner who was saying, I didn't give you a right to trespass. Here's a Wyoming law professor in 1971 saying, my message to you is not a cheerful one. It's simply this: if you goop up someone's water supply with your gunk, if you render unusable a valuable resource a neighboring landowner might have recovered, or if you grease the rocks causing earthquakes and shake down his house, the law will make you pay. Wow. So these were all, to me, these are like little predictions, little alarms.
Okay, yeah. Can everyone hear? How you doing, everyone? I'd just like to say that in my 13 years working at Frac Tracker, where I used to work, I never saw this level of concern about this issue. So it is really, it's amazing to see you all here. It kind of recalls a fight that happened up in Brookfield Township. Gloria Douglas and Jim Hennessy up there were fighting the Seneca Resources Class 2 injection wells up there. They fought it and they won, and it was a really great story. But other than that, we haven't seen a lot of victories or a lot of like serious kind of fulsome conversation about this issue. So it's a credit to you all to see this. And I work with a lot of people in other states, and they all ask, like, why is Ohio not up in arms about this waste issue? And I say, I'm going to take a photo when I'm done here and say, well, there are some people in certain parts of the state that are pretty pissed off, so it's great to see it, or otherwise very concerned. So yeah, kudos to you all. I also would say that Teresa Mills's name was mentioned a second ago, and I would also like to say that in addition to Teresa, we also lost someone, Julie Weatherington Rice, recently, who was really, she was an amazing person and a mentor to myself and so many other people in terms of like learning about this topic and like the science behind it all. So I kind of tip my hat to Julie, and also to a bunch of other people, including a friend of mine who some of you might know, Jill Hunkler, who she's a partner in crime. She lives down in Barnesville, and oh my God, she's here. Jill, how are you? I did not see that you were here, so I wasn't kissing your butt on that one. And then also I'd like to say too, a person that I got to know that I was thinking of the people talking on that video about the issues around waste is a woman named Michelle Garman. She lives up outside of Warren Township. She lives literally next to a Class 2 injection well. So if you ever want to know what it's like to live next to a very active injection well, we can put you in touch with Michelle. I think her story is really, it's an amazing story. So anyway, with that, it's just kind of amazing to kind of walk down memory lane, because since I left Frac Tracker a bunch of months ago, I've been really focusing a lot on Texas and North Dakota and what's going on with the produced water stuff there. And so like, I guess if you think you have it bad, you can think of the scale in those two states, orders of magnitude in terms of what they're dealing with. It's really quite disturbing. And I'm kind of gonna refer to that a little bit in my talk. And I'm also gonna riff a little bit here. I don't really have a prepared PowerPoint, but I'm kind of gonna pull on some of my work that I did at Frac Tracker and some of the work that we're doing at Field Notes. The first thing I wanted to talk about is, how did we get to the point where injection wells are in Ohio, but just how did we get to this point of Class 2 injection wells being the preferred method of disposing of oil and gas waste? Justin's done a really good job of laying out the history, and the only things that I wanted to add to that, and I've been doing a lot of work in my job at Field Notes, looking through several archives, namely the Oil and Gas Journal, the Oil and Gas Journal's archive, and the Journal of Petroleum Technology, between 1975 and 1982, and hopefully I'm going to be publishing some stuff around that. But really what I've learned from that is we did have this moment in the 70s, after the Clean Water and Clean Air Act were passed, where we had this inflection point where we could have gone one way or the other when it came to Class 2 wells as a disposal method, and we went the wrong way. This was like 1976 to 1980, the Carter administration. Some of you probably were around. I was just born, but I know that was a time of energy tumult. People were very concerned about where the energy was coming from, costs and the like. And during that period, during that 4-year period leading up to the Reagan revolution, what you ended up seeing was US EPA was really pushing hard at that moment to get states to be more proactive, to get them to be more complete in how they kind of managed and looked at Class 2 wells as a way to dispose of waste in terms of reporting, monitoring, you name it, the whole suite of like criteria that we should have in place today in states like Ohio that we don't. And then what you ended up seeing in this journal, in these archives, is there was this very strong and coordinated pushback from the American Petroleum Institute, the Interstate Oil and Gas Commission, independent producers in Texas, Oklahoma, and the like, Oklahoma Corporation Commission, Texas Railroad Commission. There was a lot of pushback in that moment that, like, look, if you start to require us to do the kinds of things you're saying we should do to get primacy, our models collapse. The oil and gas model will collapse if you ask us to do those kinds of things. And no sooner did they say this, Then we got Ronald Reagan came into office, and I'm not trying to play politics, but I will say that when Reagan came into office, a lot of what we're seeing today with regard to the hollowing out of agencies was happening or being discussed during that time. Some of you might know who Neil Gorsuch is. Neil Gorsuch's mom ran the EPA in the first Reagan administration. She was responsible for basically the gutting of the UIC primacy or the UIC oversight by EPA. So we have that moment and that time to thank for why we are to where we are today. The other thing that has to be said is when Ohio got primacy, there's no way we could have foreseen that we would be dealing with the levels of oil and gas waste that we're putting down into holes. As John said earlier, a lot of the wells that we have in Ohio were not designed to put stuff in, they were designed to take stuff out. And there's no way that the state of Ohio or any state that got primacy, by the way, Pennsylvania did not. So when you think about why do we have this disparity in injection wells between PA and Ohio, I don't doubt that some of it is geologic, but my thesis is that a lot of it has to do with the primacy issue. EPA does not, PA does not, Ohio does. I think that when you think about calls to action, and I think that was the last item on this, in this meeting, one of the calls to action I think that should happen, irrespective of who's in the White House, is that Ohio has demonstrated since 1980 and more recently since 2010 that they don't deserve primacy over our injection wells. They've demonstrated that they're not doing the bare minimum when it comes to demonstrating that they can do the things that are necessary to be done. And George Banziger talked about the brine trucks. I'm kind of thinking back to when I came to Frac Tracker in my oldest son is 12, so it was like 13 and a half years ago. I took a trip down to Carrollton to meet Paul Fiesel. Does anyone know Paul? Anyone heard the name Paul Fiesel? So Paul's an amazing guy, lives in Carrollton, and he was very concerned about what the oil and gas industry was doing to Carroll County. And I remember when I got to Frac Tracker, it was like, I thought I was a pretty smart person. I thought I knew a couple things, and I thought I knew what Ohioans, or like what needed to be done in the capacity that I had at Frac Tracker in terms of mapping and that kind of thing. It turns out none of those things were correct. People didn't care about any of that. What they did care about was the water, the waste. Those were the two big things. And I'll never forget that Paul Fiesel took me to lunch in Carrollton, and we sat at that town square, and he said, watch all the brine trucks go through this town. And I remember just, back of the envelope math, it was like somewhere in the order of 40% of all the traffic in that town at that moment, this was 2013, I'm gonna say, was brine truck traffic. And I kind of fast forward to Jill, the last time we were together, like a month ago. Every now and then when I go down to Barnesville, I go up through Barnesville and then go west to Cambridge. And I always stop at this rest stop because I want to see what percentage of the trucks between Wheeling and Cambridge are brine trucks. And I just did that like a month and a half ago, and it was 20% of the truck traffic, right? So this is a non-trivial thing here. And I would say in terms of the brine haulers and the trucks themselves, I can't believe that you're here. Now we can kind of have a conversation about this. I was thinking that one of the things that bothered me was the Royal Flush example that we had in Barnesville. You had this company called Royal Flush that had a bunch of brine trucks that they were transporting oil and gas waste, namely to the Class 2 wells outside of Barnesville. And we didn't really know where the stuff was coming from. There was like this, you have this feeling that a lot of it's coming from PA and West Virginia, but you don't really know the numbers. PA has this PA waste report that they put out that says, we've got so many tons of drill cuttings and so many barrels of oil and gas waste that are going into Ohio and West Virginia and, parts west. But if you match that up with the data that Ohio has, the UIC program has, it doesn't match up. So there are huge data inconsistencies that I would say. Again, another reason why Ohio doesn't deserve its primacy is it's not keeping track of the basic level of data that we need to have to do this work or to understand the industry. So brine haulers are a big deal. The way that they're placarded, John Stoltz and Justin showed that this residual waste stuff is, that's no way to do this. And I would tell you that folks in North Dakota and Texas look at the way that we're moving waste around, they think we're foolish. They think we're getting run over by industry. And that's from states that are locked into industry. So that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to say was that the work that we did at Frac Tracker, I think, demonstrated a couple things. One is that if you look at the oil and gas production in Ohio and you look at the wells that have come on from the Utica Point Pleasant over time, you see that the production has fallen off a cliff by like year 4 or 5, right? So the reason that that's a problem is because what doesn't fall off a cliff is the brine that's being produced. And what you're ending up seeing, and I would suggest, I think the more honest way to look at gas production in Ohio or any of these states is to put gas in the denominator and to put all the stuff necessary to get it out of the ground in the numerator, and you start to look at it from a ratio perspective. And you end up seeing that we're using more and more stuff to get less and less gas out of the ground. So you have to ask the question, is this a viable enterprise? And I would suggest that the data in Ohio and some of these other states says no, it's not. The unconventional space was a sloppy, inefficient space to begin with, and it's only gotten more so. And this is coming because the oil and gas industry, I like to say that the oil and gas industry is like an inverted pyramid. And at the bottom of that pyramid, the business models only function if they can dispose of waste cheaply and if they can get their water for cheap. And we did this work for several years, and what we found is that if you look at an individual well pad in Ohio, you see that the cost of disposing of waste and the water that they need is less than 1% of costs. And I say that because that's why the industry's they don't blush. They're not even thinking twice about the water that they need and the waste that they're producing. They don't have to think twice about it. And so that's a big deal. The other thing that kind of struck me about that video, I'm kind of trying to think back to what resonated with me on that video, was the idea that I didn't give you permission to dispose of waste or to go underneath my property. And I would say to you all that it's really worth everyone in this state, in this room and in this state, looking to a couple of other states for guidance. And I'll suggest to you North Dakota and Texas. North Dakota, they tried to pass Senate Bill 2344 several years ago. Senate Bill 2344 in North Dakota would have said that the pore space underneath your property, that is to say the voids and cavities, is not your property. That is free to put stuff in. Now that came in the aftermath of a case called Denbury Resources versus Moser. Denbury Resources is a big player. They've since been bought up by Exxon. They're a major player in the CCS space that I'll get to in a second. And they basically said we should be allowed to dispose of, to put brine in the pore space beneath people's property without due compensation. Now 2344 didn't make it anywhere yet. But what you end up seeing is that conversation migrated down to Texas. And in Texas, they had Senate Bill 2170. This was, I think, 3 sessions ago, which would have basically said that, we can do the same thing. We can violate your pore space and not compensate you for it. So, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that's happening all over the country. And then there was another bill that just came up in Texas, brought to you by Exxon, that said pore space is actually, the voids and the cavities beneath your property are actually the property of the landowner. But you know who pushed back against that bill and made it DOA? Was the produced water folks, the oil and gas, the produced water space. They said, no way, we can't have that. Because if you say that the pore space beneath someone's property is their property and their right, then you're going to make it so we can't put anything anywhere. So now the tension that's developing is the tension between the produced water folks and the carbon folks. They both are vying for the same pore space beneath Ohio, beneath West Virginia, beneath North Dakota. It doesn't matter. That tension exists and it's only growing. And I think it's really important to point that out because another thing I wanted to point out is the CCS conversation that you all are having and that's happening in other places.
What's that mean?
Oh, carbon capture and storage. So that's a fool's errand. That's a total canard. Really what we're talking about is CCUS, which is basically you shove CO2 down in the ground to get the oil out the other end. That's enhanced oil recovery. Some of you in the industry that are in this room, you know about this method. This method has been around for 50 years. its viability, its scalability is dubious at best, I would suggest. And I think that the industry, the Society of Petroleum Engineers and others have suggested as much. But really what we're talking about is a taking. They want to basically take your pore space beneath you and use it and not compensate you for it. And that's what's happening. So when we talk about injection wells and disposing of brine, they're either going to want to put the brine down there, or they're going to want to put the CO2 down there to get the rest of the oil out. And they're only going to get about 7% of the oil out. So I think these are the kinds of things to be concerned about. The other thing I wanted to say too about I think I said in my little blurb about the sandstone formations here in Ohio. I would suggest that the estimates that were made as to how much our sandstones could take up in terms of brine were back of the envelope at best, educated guesses. And a great place to look for that isn't Ohio, but you can look into Oklahoma and the Arbuckle Formation and the way that the Oklahoma Geologic Survey and the University of Oklahoma and the industry worked together to come up with estimates for how much that formation could take. And I think someone just gave a presentation about what's going on in Oklahoma. They were woefully underestimating what was going to happen there. So Ohio Geological Survey did the same thing. You've got these geologic surveys all over the country that give you a number and say this is the capacity of this formation. What they don't tell you is it's plus or minus 50% of that number. So we're talking about huge rounding errors, right? So we're dealing with, and Justin mentioned this, John mentioned this a little bit too, and others have mentioned it, is the ability, we have to have a little bit of humility when it comes to what we're trying to model below ground. And I don't see any humility from the DNR. I don't see any from Senator Chavez. I don't see any from the industry. There's no humility. There's no sense of we're just kind of making an educated guess, because that's what we're doing. And you all are going to be put in the path of that. And I think it's quite disturbing. And I would just suggest that, it's really important for you all, for all of us, to pay attention to what the industry says, not just in things like Bloomberg or in GRIS, because those are good, but look at the way that the industry's talking in their own journals, in their own publications. That's going to guide you as to what they're thinking about. They're not talking about carbon capture for saving the planet and climate change. They're talking about carbon capture to get more oil out of the ground. They're not talking about beneficial reuse and doing something about the produced water. They're talking about just getting the price of disposal down, right? And all of the projects that we hear about in other states about dealing with produced water in any other way other than injection wells cost $2.50, $3, sometimes $10 per barrel. That's a non-starter for the industry. They will not tolerate that number. They need it 10 to 15 cents to 30 cents max per barrel, right? So that number, those costs are really important. And that's really the only way that the industry is looking at it right now. And, I just think it's incumbent upon this group to kind of, take action, but also just to understand that within this little area that you live in, you're kind of part of this larger ecosystem that is the oil and gas waste landscape, to include the ways in which it's being disposed of right now. I haven't been paying attention to Ohio in several months, but I know that there's talk about trains and barges and this, that, and the other thing. It's lipstick on a pig. It's just, they don't want to deal with their structural problem, which is the fact that as the gas goes down and as these production declines go steeper, and as they move from Carrollton down to Belmont to Monroe to who knows where, and then maybe go back to Carrollton and refrac a well, they don't want to deal with the fact that, our business models are predicated on cheap water and cheap waste. And as we see these production declines get steeper, there's nowhere to turn. So they're looking for the cheapest method to do it. And it's always going to be class 2 wells. And I would suggest that anyone in this room, if you have a chance, there's a firm called B3 Insights out of Texas. They do some really good data work on produced water. And they're publishing stuff right now that's basically saying, we can talk about all these other ways of disposing of waste all we want, but only 1 in 10 barrels at most in the next 25 to 30 years in these major formations is going to be disposed of by any other way other than class 2 wells. Our models don't account for that. So these are the real smart people in the industry that are forecasting what's happening, and it's not looking good. And where they have put injection wells in Ohio is where they're going to put injection wells in the future, or where they're going to want to do it. And I would suggest that that's Cambridge to Wheeling, down along the Ohio River, this southeast corner of the state. And it's just it's been a long journey looking at this stuff, and I'm really glad to see all these people in this room getting up in arms about this issue. I would also suggest too, though, like, develop coalitions in other parts of the state, because there are people.
The injection well, and it's down there, and there's salt, there's heavy metals, there's some of the fracking chemicals, and here it's popping up a conventional well, or here is an aquifer. What of those contaminants are going to make it through the underground system to the aquifer? Maybe some of the fracking chemicals are more concerning than the radium, because maybe it will stick out. But why don't you follow up on that?
All right, so if I can't give you a number or a probability, but it also depends on essentially two things. One, the construction of the well itself. Okay, what kind of pressures are they figuring that they're going to have? Okay, what are the specs on the well? And then the second thing is the operator in themselves. Because when the problems happen, like when they had the earthquakes in Youngstown, it was about putting too much pressure down the hole, putting too much fluids down the hole, challenging the integrity of the well itself. And then it was brought out too that it contains flowback. And that flowback has got the surfactants and whatnot that help the hydraulic fracturing. And interestingly enough, it's almost what they want to happen, in the sense that they're actually fracking the formation that they're injecting the fluids into, which increases the possibility of further connections with pre-existing faults, etc. So it's the combination of things. You can't really predict one way or the other, but eventually, and looking at industry numbers, there's a certain percentage. So it's going to happen.
Thank you. The next question is very much related. How long do we have?
Hello. I cannot answer that question, but I do want to piggyback one thing on the pressure, the point that John made, which is that if you look at the injection wells that are coming online or being proposed in Ohio recently, the volumes, the daily volumes and the pressures that are being proposed are sometimes orders of magnitude more than the existing inventory of Class 2 wells. So the industry knows that they need to keep higher pressures and more volume. So everything that John just said is going to be amplified in the presence of these mega injection wells. But as far as how long, I have no idea.
This might be a question for our local officials, but is Davola and Marietta Water testing for radioactive waste in the drinking water already? Is it possible that we are already contaminated?
Well, I can't tell you what exactly you guys are testing for already, but as far as in Pennsylvania, and there's certain things, like if you're a public drinking water facility, you're regulated by the EPA. Okay, but I do know, and I'm actually on the Laboratory Accreditation Advisory Committee, they test for tritium. They don't test for radium. The reason they test for tritium is because we have nuclear power plants that discharge tritium into waterways. Okay, but no one's, again, testing for things that are associated with oil and gas. We don't test the leachate from the landfills that are taking these wastes for things like barium and strontium and radium. Why? Because they're sanitary landfills. Okay, they're not supposed to be taking these things. You can't put your smoke detector in your trash because it has americium, which is a radioactive element. Because that's not supposed to go into the landfill. But these guys can put the waste that has the radium in it. So that's the hole in the regulatory framework. A, it's hazardous, and two, they're ignoring the fact that they should be testing for these things, but it's not currently in the regulations.
But drinking water, yeah, so to follow up on that, drinking water systems do have to test for radium, but it's, it can be as long as once every 9 years. And that would be one test for like one moment, someone goes out, takes a sample, you know, and if there's a lot of rain, there's a variety of factors that could affect it. And then for those 9 years, you're running on that one sample. So I think it would be helpful to try and ensure that not just radium, but some of the other contaminants are more regularly tested for.
I'll just state in Marietta, our last sample was taken in June of 2025, and it was a non-detect.
Great, thank you, Susan. For those who didn't hear, our last test for radiation was taken this year in 2025, and the results were non-detect. Yeah, thank goodness.
And there's a good site, right? Is that from the EWG?
That's from Steve Eddy, the Marietta wastewater superintendent.
Okay, yeah, and there are a number of ways, but your local water supply would be the best way to monitor your drinking water, or local.
Thank you.
Every 9 years tested.
Yeah.
I think this is probably going to be the last question I have time for, but has there ever been a correlation between cancer clusters and injection wells?
No, I mean so again, these are really important questions being asked. Correlation in science is a very powerful word, and I think there's been a lot of studies connected to wellhead and wellhead emissions. I'm not aware of many studies looking at health in regions where there's a lot of injection wells. Are you aware of that?
No.
Okay.
And it's not going to get funded, and that's part of the problem. Seriously, you know, the work that we've done has been basically funded by foundations, private foundations with concern, and then they're labeled as, you know, anti-fracking. Okay, but NIH, very limited support for this stuff. NIEHS, forget it.
Hey, you guys, do you know what C8 is?
Yeah.
Seeing.
Yeah.
It's already happened, isn't it, back?
They always try to kill us that way.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think this is, yeah, I spent time in this community, and that is a really important concern. You all have a precedent
So
of,
they had to fix that problem.
Yeah.
But the liability on this stuff is so low, who's gonna fix it when it's already here? We need to round up. We need to start. It ain't going away.
Yeah, thank you.
Buried in the ground. Fight it.
Yep.
right.
And look what happened.
Well,
Marietta, Ohio.
okay. All right, everybody.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you guys all for answering all of those questions and just for making the trip here. It's just been such a wonderful night. So before everyone leaves, we've heard a lot tonight about the injection well issue in Washington County, and it's a lot to digest. But here's the good news. We're already deeply engaged with the issue. This is evident with the powerful panel of experts we've been able to feature tonight. And here are some of the ways that you can show support for the cause.
Sign the petition, like most of us did tonight. It'll be sent to Governor DeWine, Mary Mertz, Director of Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and Eric Vindell, Chief of Division of Oil and Gas Resource Management. The petition asks for a 3-year moratorium, and remember that you can have your friends and family sign it online.
What's the website?
It's on, if you go to Facebook and you go to Washington County for Safe Drinking Water, you'll see the petition there. Also, you can put a sign in your yard to show support. The sign says, "Protect our water" on one side and "No more injection wells in Washington County" on the other side. We have signs out in the lobby, and they're available for a $10 donation. It goes entirely just for paying for the signs.
Donate money so that we can illuminate our cause by putting up billboards, create commercials, distribute flyers, do mailers, distribute educational materials, and outreach content. You can donate tonight, and we also have a post office box, and we also have another site, GoFundMe, And we also have brochures out in the lobby that tells you all this information so you can donate to our cause.
And then also you could write a letter to the editor and do a viewpoint in the local newspaper. You can explain how you feel about injection wells, express your concerns about the prospect that our county is becoming a dumping ground for other states. Go ahead, Dee.
I want to know if we have any elected officials in here tonight. Would you stand up?
Thank you.
Mr. Ritter, is Mr. Ritter here, our state rep? Okay. Any county commissioners? Any county commissioners here? No? There were two? Good. All right, and anybody else? All right, thank you. Why don't we just wrap it up?
Yeah.
Go to the end.
All right, I'll just go to the end. Let's go.
All right, you want me to say that last little
Yeah.
thing? All right, last thing, two little things. Hang on. We're almost done. We have something important to wrap up with. Maya Angelou said, "When you do nothing, you feel overwhelmed and powerless. But when you get involved, you feel a sense of hope and accomplishment. That comes from knowing you are working to make things better. So let's all choose hope, let's all choose accomplishment, and let's all choose to make Washington County a sustainable, healthy place to live by insisting and even demanding safe drinking water, and by insisting and demanding to have sensible approach to injection wells in our county."
If you want to see change and have change, we're all going to have to be the change. And remember, this is our county, it's our land, and it's our water. Thank you, everyone. You can go home now. You're all dismissed.
Do you need any of this stuff?